You know that moment at a Christmas party when the house smells like cinnamon and pine, and you almost believe the world is soft again? That is when I heard my mother say my name like it was a deed she could sign. I was holding a platter of gingerbread when the dining room turned into a board meeting. They were discussing my vacation home like it was already theirs, assuming I would not find out until it was too late. My name is Maeve Stevens, and I have built my entire life around the concept of calculated risk. In my line of work as a senior operations lead for Northline Compliance Partners, I spend my days auditing corporate disasters, sifting through wreckage to find the one loose bolt, the one ignored safety protocol, or the one fraudulent signature that brought the whole structure down. I am the person they call when the damage is done, but the bleeding has not stopped. I am the fixer. I am the reliable one. I am the one who does not break. But standing in the hallway of my parents' house in a quiet suburb just outside Madison, Wisconsin, I felt less like a crisis manager and more like a ghost haunting her own life. It was 7 o'clock on Christmas Eve, and the house was vibrating with that specific, aggressive cheerfulness that only suburban families seem to master. The air smelled thick with cinnamon, roasted ham, and the pine needles dropping from the oversized Douglas fir in the living room. It was warm, stiflingly so. My cashmere sweater felt like a vice around my chest, and the jet lag from my flight out of London was humming in the base of my skull like a high-tension wire. I had been awake for nearly 24 hours, powered entirely by airport espresso and the grim determination to survive the holidays without an incident. I adjusted the heavy ceramic platter in my hands. It was piled high with gingerbread cookies I had bought at a high-end bakery in the city, and transferred onto my mother's china to avoid a lecture about homemade effort. That was the dance we did. I provided the resources. They provided the criticism. Maeve, honey, is that you blocking the hallway? A distant aunt, Aunt Carol, I think, or maybe a cousin I had not seen in 10 years, squeezed past me with a glass of wine in hand. She smelled like expensive perfume and white wine vinegar. Just bringing out dessert, I said, my voice engaging that automatic, polished warmth I used in boardrooms. Go ahead, I'll be right there. She patted my arm with a damp hand. You look tired, dear. Working too hard again? You really should settle down. Look at Brielle. She's glowing. I smiled. It was a tight, practice thing. Brielle is great, I said, sidestepping the comparison. Brielle, my younger sister, was currently holding court in the living room, surrounded by a pile of torn wrapping paper and the adoration of our relatives. She was charming, chaotic, and perpetually 1 month late on every bill she owned. She was the golden child because she needed them. I was the distant child because I did not. I waited for the aunt to disappear into the noise of the living room before I exhaled, letting my shoulders drop 2 inches. I just needed to get through tonight, tomorrow morning. I would drive 3 hours north to Door County. Just thinking about it made the tension in my neck loosen. Door County was my secret. Well, not a secret in the literal sense. My family knew I owned property there, but they did not know what it was. To them, it was just Maeve's little cabin. To me, it was the only place on earth where I did not have to be Maeve Stevens, senior lead. I had bought the dilapidated lake house 4 years ago with the inheritance my grandfather left me. It was not a fortune, just enough for a down payment and materials. But I had poured every spare weekend and every bonus check into restoring it. I had sanded the original white pine floors by hand until my shoulders ached. I had sourced vintage brass fixtures to match the 1920s era of the build. I had installed a smart security system that I monitored from my phone like a hawk. It was minimalist, pristine, and silent. It was my sanctuary. It was the one thing in my life that I had not built for a client, or a boss, or my parents. I had built it for me. I gripped the platter tighter and moved toward the kitchen. The swinging door was pushed partially open. Just a crack, letting a slice of yellow light spill onto the hallway runner. I was about to push through with my hip when I heard my mother's voice. It was not her party voice, that high-pitched, melodic tone she used for guests. This was her project manager voice, the voice she used when she was reorganizing the pantry or deciding which of my life choices needed correcting. "It is going to be tight, Mark," she said, "but if we get the crew in there starting the 26th, we can probably get the wall down before New Year's." I froze. My boots stopped on the hardwood. The platter in my hands suddenly felt like it weighed 50 pounds. "The 26th is too soon." "Elaine," my father's voice replied. He sounded weary but resigned, the way he always did when he was about to give her exactly what she wanted. "The contractor said he needs a deposit before he orders the lumber, and we haven't even told her yet. We don't need to tell her. Mark, we are surprising her." My heart did a strange, slow stutter in my chest. Surprising her. There was the sound of a cabinet closing, the clink of glass on granite. My mother continued, her voice gaining that terrifying confidence she displayed when she was completely wrong. "Maeve is never there. Anyway, the place sits empty for months. It is selfish to keep it like a museum when Brielle and Kyle are squeezed into that apartment. Once we open up that downstairs layout and put in the bunk beds, it will be perfect for the whole family. It's what Dad would have wanted. A family legacy." The blood drained from my face so fast I felt dizzy. They were talking about my cabin. They were not talking about visiting. They were talking about construction. "I don't know," my father said. "She's funny about that place. You know how she is about her aesthetic. Her aesthetic is cold. Mark," my mother scoffed, "it looks like a hotel lobby. It needs warmth. It needs life. Besides, I already told Brielle we'd have it ready for the boys by summer. If we don't start the improvements now, we will miss the window." Improvements. The word hung in the air between the kitchen and the hallway like a physical blow. They had already told Brielle. They had already discussed a timeline. They had already decided that my sanctuary, my carefully restored, silent, private haven, was actually just raw material for their family legacy. I stood there, staring at the sliver of light, feeling a sensation I hadn't felt since I was 16 years old. It was the feeling of being completely erased. It didn't matter that I was 32. It didn't matter that I paid for their anniversary cruises, or that I had bailed Brielle out of credit card debt 3 times in the last 5 years. To them, I wasn't an adult with property rights. I was just a resource, a placeholder until the real family needed the space. My mother's voice dropped lower, conspiratorial. "Look, just write the check for the deposit. I will transfer the money from the joint account. We can explain it to her later. She never notices the small expenses anyway. She is too busy with work." "I worry about the timing," Dad said. "Don't worry," Mom snapped. I checked her calendar on the fridge. She flies out to Tokyo on the 15th of January. If we get the demolition done while she is dealing with the year-end audits, she won't even know until it's too late to stop it. And once it's done, she will see how much better it is. She will thank us. The air left my lungs. They were tracking me. My father's mention of the 15th of January wasn't a guess. It was precise. I had mentioned that trip once. In passing. 3 weeks ago, they had filed it away. Not because they cared about my career, but because it gave them a window of opportunity. They were planning a demolition around my travel schedule. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a heist. A cold clarity washed over me, displacing the shock. In my job, I deal with hostile takeovers. I deal with embezzlement. I deal with people who think they are smarter than the paper trail they leave behind. I recognize this tactic. It was an ambush. If I walked in there now and screamed, if I threw the gingerbread on the floor and demanded to know who gave them the right, I would lose. My mother would cry. She would clutch her chest and talk about how she only wanted us to be together. My father would get defensive and say I was being hysterical. The narrative would shift instantly. Maeve is unstable. Maeve hates family. Maeve is ruining Christmas. I would be the villain, and they would proceed with the renovation the moment I turned my back, just to prove they were right. No. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of cinnamon and betrayal. I forced my shoulders down. I unlocked my jaw. I adjusted the platter in my hands, feeling the cold ceramic bite into my fingertips. I needed to be the Maeve Stevens they thought I was. The distracted one, the busy one, the one who signed checks and looked the other way. I stepped back, deliberately scuffing my heel against the floorboard to make noise. Then, I walked forward again, pushing the door open with a bright, artificial smile plastered on my face. "Here we go," I announced, my voice steady, betraying nothing. "Gingerbread, fresh from the platter." My parents jumped. My mother spun around from the counter, her hand flying to her throat. For a split second, I saw the guilt flash across her face, sharp and undeniable. But she was a master of the pivot. In less than a second, the guilt was gone, replaced by a beaming, welcoming smile. "Maeve!" she exclaimed, rushing over to take the platter from me. "Oh, those look delicious. Did you hear us talking? We were just discussing the new year." "I just walked up," I lied smoothly. "I was trapped by Aunt Carol in the hallway. She seems to think I'm aging rapidly." My father let out a breath, his shoulders relaxing. He was leaning against the island, looking at me with that familiar mix of affection and condescension. "You know, Carol," he chuckled. "She means well. You do look a bit peaked, kiddo. Japan trip coming up soon, right?" He was testing the waters, checking his intel. I didn't blink. I walked over to the fridge and opened it, grabbing a bottle of sparkling water so I wouldn't have to look him in the eye. "Yep," I said, unscrewing the cap. "The 15th? It's going to be a beast. I'll probably be offline for the first 2 weeks just dealing with the regulatory compliance." I took a sip, letting the bubbles burn my throat. "Why do you ask?" "Oh, nothing," Dad said, exchanging a quick, loaded glance with my mother. "Just making sure you're not overdoing it. We barely see you." "Well, you have me for tonight," I said, turning back to face them. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. I looked at my mother, then at my father. I looked at the people who had raised me, the people who were currently plotting to destroy the one thing I loved to make room for my sister's children. "Actually," I added, improvising the first step of my own strategy, "I was thinking I might head back to the city a little early, maybe the 27th. I have some prep work to do before Tokyo." My mother's eyes lit up. It was subtle, but I saw it. I had just given them permission. I had just told them the coast was clear. "That sounds sensible, honey," she said, patting my cheek. "You should rest. Don't worry about the cabin. Your father and I can check on it for you if the pipes freeze." "That would be great," I said. "Thanks, Mom." I watched them relax. They thought they had won. They thought I was the same Maeve I had always been, the one who equated financial support with love, the one who bought her way into their approval. They thought I was a checkbook with a pulse. I pushed off the counter. "I'm going to go say hi to Brielle," I said. "I think I saw Kyle arrive." Go, Mom shooed me. "I'll bring these cookies out." I walked out of the kitchen, my spine straight, my smile fixed. But as I crossed the threshold back into the noise of the party, the temperature in my chest dropped to absolute zero. They wanted to play games? Fine. I audited billion-dollar companies for a living. I tore apart executives who thought they could hide assets in offshore accounts. I tracked digital footprints that people thought were erased 5 years ago. My parents were playing checkers, and they had no idea I was sitting at a chessboard. I navigated through the crowded living room, nodding at relatives, dodging running children. I spotted Brielle on the sofa, laughing at something on her phone. She looked up as I approached, her eyes bright and vacant. "Maeve!" she squealed, reaching out a hand. "Did you bring presents?" "Of course," I said. Taking her hand, it felt limp and soft. "They're in the car. You're the best," she said, squeezing my fingers before turning back to her phone. "Oh, hey. Did Mom tell you? We might come visit the cabin this winter. The boys would love the snow." "She mentioned it," I said. "We can talk about it later." I excused myself and headed for the stairs. "Just need to wash up," I told anyone who looked my way. I walked up the stairs to my childhood bedroom. It was exactly as I had left it 10 years ago. frozen in a time capsule of high school accolades and faded posters. I closed the door behind me and turned the lock. The sound of the latch clicking into place was the most satisfying sound I had heard all night. I walked over to the window and looked out at the driveway. Snow was falling gently, coating the world in a pristine, deceptive white. I could see my father's truck parked next to my rental car. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My hands were not shaking. That surprised me. I thought I would be trembling with rage, but I wasn't. I was steady. I was calm. It was the calm of the auditor who has just found the smoking gun. I unlocked my phone and opened the app for my cabin's security system. System status: armed. Interior temperature: 62 degrees. Last entry: 2 weeks ago. Owner. Everything looked normal on the surface, but I knew what was coming. They were going to wait until I left. They were going to use the spare key I had given them for emergencies. They were going to hire a contractor, likely the cheapest one they could find, probably someone Dad knew from the golf course, and they were going to tear down the load-bearing wall between the kitchen and the living room because Mom read in a magazine that open concepts foster family unity. They were going to violate my space, my trust, and my legal rights, all under the banner of family. I stared at the screen. A notification popped up from my work calendar. Flight to Tokyo. January 15. I didn't have a flight to Tokyo. I had put that placeholder there weeks ago because I was considering a conference. But I had declined it last Monday. I just hadn't deleted the calendar entry. They had been snooping. They had physically checked my calendar or accessed my shared family cloud, which I had forgotten I was even synced to. I sat down on the edge of my twin bed. The mattress creaked. Okay, I whispered to the empty room. Okay, if they wanted a war, I would give them one, but it wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be messy. It would be precise. It would be documented. And it would be absolute. I swiped out of the security app and opened my notes. I started a new file. Case file. Stevens Residence / unauthorized construction. Date: December 24th. Subject: anticipated breach of property. I typed in the first entry: overheard conversation between E, S, and M, S. Regarding unauthorized demolition of interior walls at Door County property. Intent to proceed without owner consent. Intent to conceal activity based on owner's travel schedule. I stared at the words. They looked cold, clinical, just the way I liked them. Downstairs, the sound of jingle bells drifted up through the floorboards. I could hear laughter. I could hear my mother's voice rising above the din, cheerful and dominant. Maeve? A knock at the door. It was my father. Maeve, you okay in there? Dinner's almost ready. I stared at the door handle. For a second, I imagined opening the door and telling him I knew. I imagined begging him to respect me. I imagined the look of dismissal he would give me. The way he would say, "It's just a house, Maeve. Don't be selfish." I stood up and walked to the door. I checked my reflection in the vanity mirror. My face was pale, but my eyes were hard. I fixed my smile. I unlocked the door and pulled it open. "I'm fine, Dad," I said. Just checking emails. You know how it is. Work never stops." He smiled, relieved. "That's my girl. Always working. Come on down. Mom made your favorite stuffing." "Coming," I said. I followed him down the stairs. Watching the back of his head, he looked happy. He thought he had a successful daughter, a growing family, and a vacation home he could repurpose at will. He thought he was the patriarch of a happy, functional clan. He had no idea that he was currently under audit, and I was about to find every single discrepancy. To understand why the conversation in the kitchen felt less like a family dispute and more like a corporate raid, you have to understand the last 6 months of my life. I work for a firm called Northline Compliance Partners. We do not have billboards, and we do not have a friendly social media presence. We are the people companies hire when they are staring down the barrel of a federal indictment or a shareholder lawsuit. My official title is Senior Operations Lead, but my actual job is to walk into burning buildings, metaphorically, and occasionally literally, and catalog the ashes. for the last half of the year. I had been stationed in Florida, living out of a suitcase in a hotel that smelled perpetually of industrial cleaner and mildew. I was leading a disaster recovery audit for a logistics company that had lost 40% of its infrastructure in a hurricane, only to discover that their insurance records were as watery as their foundation. I spent 18 hours a day looking at spreadsheets, arguing with adjusters, and trying to salvage solvency from negligence. My life was a grid of gray hotel carpets, lukewarm room service coffee, and the blue light of my laptop screen. I did not have friends there. I did not have hobbies. I had deadlines. And I had the crushing weight of other people's panic. That is why the cabin in Door County was not just real estate to me. It was not an investment property, and it certainly was not a vacation home in the way my parents used the phrase, as a backdrop for Instagram photos and loud family barbecues. It was an exhale. I had bought the place 4 years ago, 6 months after my grandfather passed away. He was a quiet man, a Finnish carpenter who had spent 50 years working with his hands. He was the only person in my family who understood the value of silence. When he died, he left me a small inheritance. It was not a fortune. It was not enough to retire on, or even enough to buy a house outright in the city. To my parents, the sum was disappointing. They had expected more, perhaps enough to pay off their own mortgage or fund Brielle's third attempt at a college degree. But to me, that money was a seed. I found the cabin on a foreclosure listing. It was a wreck. The roof was sagging, the plumbing was shot, and the interior had been colonized by raccoons. My father had laughed when he saw the photos. He told me it was a money pit. He told me I should put the money into a mutual fund, or better yet, loan it to Brielle and Kyle for a down payment on a condo. I ignored him. I bought it, and I spent the next 3 years bringing it back to life. I did not hire a general contractor to manage the whole thing. I did it myself, hiring specific tradespeople only when I needed a permit signed off, and doing the grunt work on my weekends. I drove up on Friday nights, exhausted from a 60-hour work week, and spent my Saturdays tearing out wrought and my Sundays sanding floors. I learned how to reglaze windows. I learned the difference between load-bearing and partition walls. I learned that physical exhaustion is a mercy because it quiets the mind in a way that mental exhaustion never does. I kept the restoration quiet. I never sent progress photos to the family group chat. I never bragged about the vintage clawfoot tub I found at a salvage yard or the original Douglas fir beams I uncovered behind the drywall. I learned a long time ago that in the Stevens family, bragging attracts hands. If you have something good, the family assumes it is community property. If you have extra money, it is our windfall. If you have a spare bedroom, it is our guest suite. My parents do not do this out of malice. Exactly. They do it out of a suffocating, codependent definition of love that views individual success as a betrayal of the collective unit. To Elaine and Mark Stevens, the fact that I was successful was not a source of pride. It was a resource to be mined. They believed that because they had raised me, they owned shares in my future. And then there was Brielle. My sister is 3 years younger than me, and she is everything I am not. She is charming, effervescent, and perpetually chaotic. She is the kind of person who forgets to pay her car insurance, but manages to talk the police officer out of giving her a ticket. She floats through life on a cloud of good intentions and bad execution. Brielle is married to Kyle, a man who is nice enough but suffers from a chronic inability to finish anything he starts. He has been about to launch a graphic design business for 5 years. Before that, he was about to be a craft brewer. Together, they live in a cycle of almost emergencies. They are always one car repair, one medical bill, or one rent hike away from disaster. And I am the safety net. I realized this pattern sitting in my childhood bedroom, staring at the dark screen of my phone. I realized that my anger at my parents' plan to renovate my cabin was not just about the cabin, it was about the precedent I had set. I had trained them to do this. When Brielle needed $5,000 for a surprise tax bill last year, I wrote the check. I told myself it was easier than listening to my mother cry about how Brielle might go to jail. when my parents wanted to go on an anniversary cruise to Alaska, but could not justify the expense. I paid for it. I told myself it was a gift. When Kyle needed a new laptop for his non-existent business, I bought it. I told myself I was being a good daughter. I told myself I was being a supportive sister. I told myself that because I had the means. I had the obligation, but I was lying. I was not paying for their things because I wanted to help. I was paying them to leave me alone. I was paying a tax on my own freedom. Every check I wrote was a bribe to keep the guilt at bay, to buy myself another 6 months of distance without having to feel like I had abandoned them. I had created a dynamic where my yes was the default setting. I had never drawn a hard line. I had never said, "This is mine, and you cannot touch it." The cabin was supposed to be that line. Inside that house, I kept the things that actually mattered to me. My grandfather's set of chisels, wrapped in oiled leather, sat on the mantelpiece. They were not valuable to anyone else, but I cleaned them every time I visited. I had a first edition of a collection of essays I found in a bookstore in London, a heavy wool blanket I bought in Iceland, and a coffee mug that was just the right weight for my hand. These were small things, but they were my things. They were not family heirlooms to be argued over. They were not spare items for Brielle's kids to break. The items my parents were currently planning to clear out, the clutter my mother had referred to, were the anchors of my identity outside of this house. I thought about the conversation I had overheard in the kitchen. My father's hesitation had not been about morality, it had been about logistics. He was not worried that it was wrong to demolish my wall. He was worried I would come home too soon. My mother did not care about my taste or my comfort. She cared about fitting 2 sets of bunk beds into a space that was designed for silence. They viewed my life as a container that was too big for just me. They looked at my empty rooms and saw waste. They looked at my bank account and saw potential. They looked at me and saw a vessel that was failing to fulfill its primary purpose, supporting the family. I stood up and paced the small length of my old bedroom. The carpet was worn in the center, a testament to the years I spent pacing in here as a teenager, dreaming of the day I could leave. The irony was suffocating. I had spent my entire adult life building walls, firewalls for clients, legal walls for contracts, emotional walls for myself, and yet, the people closest to me were the only ones who knew exactly how to walk right through them. I remembered a specific moment from the Florida job. I was sitting across from the CEO of the logistics company. He was a man who had inherited the business from his father, and he had run it into the ground because he could not say no to his brother-in-law, who was embezzling from the supply chain. I didn't want to cause a scene, the CEO had told me, wiping sweat from his forehead. It's family. You make allowances. I had looked at him, cold and unfeeling, and said, "Allowances are for children. You are running a corporation. You have a fiduciary duty to protect the asset." I had felt so superior in that moment. I had judged him for his weakness. Now, standing in my parents' house, hearing the muffled laughter of my brother-in-law downstairs, I realized I was no better than that CEO. I was letting the board of directors, my parents, loot the company because I was afraid of a difficult meeting. But the audit was over. The findings were conclusive. My parents were not just overstepping boundaries, they were engaging in a hostile takeover. They had moved from asking for favors to seizing assets. They had escalated the conflict without ever declaring war. Relying on the fact that I would be too polite, too tired, or too good to fight back. They were wrong. The Maeve who wrote checks to make the problem go away was gone. She had been left in a hotel room in Florida. The Maeve who was standing here now was the senior operations lead. I was the person who looked at a disaster and saw a process. I checked my watch. It was 7:45. Dinner would be served in 15 minutes. I needed to go downstairs. I needed to sit at that table, eat the ham, compliment the potatoes, and listen to Brielle talk about her big plans for the new year. I needed to let them think that everything was normal, because if they knew I knew, they would stop. They would gaslight me. They would say it was just an idea, just a discussion. They would cover their tracks. I needed them to commit. I needed them to take the first step. I needed the physical evidence of their betrayal. The permit application, the contractor's invoice, the unauthorized entry. I needed to let them break the law so I could finally enforce it. I walked over to the mirror again. The woman staring back at me looked tired. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her skin was pale from months of indoor air, but her jaw was set. I applied a fresh coat of lipstick. It was a dark red, a shade called Power Play, that I usually saved for closing meetings. "Showtime," I whispered. I unlocked the door and stepped out into the hallway. The smell of the ham was overpowering now, salty and rich. I could hear my mother calling everyone to the table. "Maeve, come on down. It's getting cold." "Coming, Mom?" I called back, my voice light, airy, and completely hollow. I walked down the stairs, one hand on the banister, feeling the wood grain under my palm. There were linen napkins folded into swans, crystal goblets that had not seen daylight since 1998, and a centerpiece of holly that was large enough to obstruct cross-table eye contact. I took my seat across from Brielle and Kyle, smoothing my skirt over my knees. My father sat at the head of the table, carving the ham with a surgical concentration that suggested he was defusing a bomb rather than serving dinner. My mother fluttered between the kitchen and the dining room, topping off wine glasses and rearranging serving spoons that were already perfectly aligned. I watched them. I watched them the way I watched a client during a deposition when I knew they were hiding a second set of books. I looked for the micro-expressions, the glances that lingered a second too long, the nervous tics that betrayed a rehearsed narrative. "So," my mother said, finally settling into her chair and shaking out her napkin. She beamed at me, but the smile did not reach her eyes. Her eyes were scanning my face, looking for cracks. "Tell us about London. Maeve, is it terribly gray?" "It is gray," I said, picking up my fork. "But productive. We closed the audit on the shell company last Tuesday." "That sounds intense," Brielle said, reaching for the mashed potatoes. "I don't know how you do it. All those numbers. I would go crazy." "It pays the bills," I said simply. "Speaking of bills," Kyle interjected, his mouth half full of a roll. "Did you hear about the new rate hikes on property taxes? Brutal." My father shot him a sharp look, a warning look. Kyle blinked and shoveled more potatoes into his mouth, effectively silencing himself. "Maeve doesn't need to worry about that," Dad said, his voice booming a little too loudly. "She is smart with her money, always has been." He sliced a piece of ham and placed it on my plate. "But you do look tired, honey. Your mother and I were just saying, you look like you have been running a marathon." "I am fine, Dad. Just jet lag." "No, really," my mother chimed in, leaning forward. Her voice dropped to that solicitous, concerned tone that usually preceded a request for a favor. "You look exhausted, pale. I really think you should take it easy this week. Stay in the city, sleep in your own apartment. Let us spoil you a little." I cut a piece of ham, keeping my eyes on the knife. "I was actually thinking of heading up to the cabin tomorrow," I said casually. "I haven't seen it in months. I need to check the pipes." The silence that followed was instantaneous. It lasted only a second, but it was heavy. I saw my mother's hand tighten around the stem of her wine glass. I saw my father stop chewing. "Oh, I wouldn't do that," my father said quickly. He wiped his mouth with his napkin, shaking his head with exaggerated gravity. "I was listening to the weather report on the radio this morning. They are calling for ice up north. Door County is going to be a skating rink. You know how those back roads get. The county plows never get to your lane until the afternoon." I took a sip of water to hide my expression. I had checked the weather report 10 minutes ago in my bedroom. The forecast for Door County was 34 degrees and sunny for the next 3 days. The roads were dry. He was lying, and he was lying poorly. "That is strange," I said, keeping my voice light. My weather app said it was clear. "Apps are never right," Dad insisted, waving a dismissive hand. "Local radio knows best. Besides, the heater up there, I don't know if it is reliable. You don't want to get stuck up there with no heat and icy roads. It is a safety issue. Maeve, I would not sleep a wink knowing you were up there alone." He sounded so protective. He sounded like a father who just wanted his daughter safe. If I didn't know he was trying to keep the driveway clear for a demolition crew, I might have been touched. "I suppose you are right," I lied. "I don't want to risk the car." The tension in the room evaporated instantly. My mother let out a breath she had been holding. "Exactly," she said. "Stay here, or go back to your apartment in Chicago. It is so much more comfortable. You have that nice concierge. And the internet is better," Brielle added. "I mean, how do you even stand it up there? It is so quiet. It is like a tomb." "I like the quiet," I said. Brielle rolled her eyes good-naturedly. "I guess. But honestly, Maeve, that place is wasted on just one person. It is a big house. It needs noise. It needs life. The boys would love it. But there is nowhere for them to play. It is all breakable." "It is restored," I corrected gently. "There is a difference." "Right? Right?" Brielle said, waving her fork. "But it is so formal. Kids need space. They need open floors. They need to be able to run from the kitchen to the living room without hitting a wall." My heart hammered against my ribs. Without hitting a wall. They were literally reciting the architectural plans for the renovation they hadn't told me about. They were criticizing the layout of my home to my face, using the very arguments they had likely used to justify the demolition to themselves. "Maeve doesn't use it right. Maeve makes it too stiff. We are fixing it." I took a bite of potatoes. They tasted like ash. "Well," I said, "it works for me." "For now," Kyle said. He poured himself another glass of wine, the liquid splashing dangerously close to the rim. "But you never know. Priorities change. Once the place is opened up, it will feel like ours. I mean—" He stopped. The clinking of silverware ceased. Kyle froze, the wine bottle hovering in midair. He looked at Brielle, then at my father, his eyes widening as he realized what he had just said. "Once the place is opened up, it will feel like ours." I looked at him. I kept my face perfectly blank. I tilted my head slightly, feigning confusion. "Opened up?" I asked. "What do you mean?" My mother jumped in before Kyle could stutter out an excuse. "Oh, he just means opened up for the season." She laughed, a high, brittle sound. "You know, opening the curtains, letting the light in. It always feels more like a family home when everyone is there. Right?" "Right," Kyle said, sweating. "Yeah, that is what I meant. Just having people there makes it feel bigger." "I see," I said. I looked down at my plate, pushing a pea around with my fork. They thought I bought it. They thought I was so desperate for connection, so eager to be part of the we, that I would overlook the slip. But I was logging it. I was mentally stamping the date and time on the statement. Kyle, admission of intent. Opened up. Feel like ours. My phone was in my pocket, but my father's phone was sitting on the table next to his plate. Face up. It buzzed. The screen lit up. I glanced over. The font was large, set to high accessibility for his reading glasses. I read the notification clearly before the screen went dark. Message from Harborview Renovations. Preview. Dumpster drop-off confirmed for Tuesday morning. Crew arrives at 8. I looked away immediately, focusing on my wine glass. Tuesday morning. That was the day after tomorrow. That was the 26th. They were not wasting time. They had scheduled the dumpster before they had even gotten me out of the state. They were that confident. They were that arrogant. "Who is texting on Christmas Eve?" my mother asked lightly, though her eyes darted to the phone with anxiety. "Just spam," my father said, flipping the phone face down. He cleared his throat. "So, Maeve, tell us about the Tokyo trip. When exactly do you fly out?" I looked at him. I looked at the man who had taught me how to ride a bicycle. I looked at the man who had walked me down the aisle at my sister's wedding because I was the maid of honor, and he wanted to make sure I looked supportive. I realized then, with a finality that was almost physical, that I was not his daughter anymore. I was an obstacle. I was a tenant he was trying to evict. I was a resource he was trying to liquidate. They did not love me. They loved what I could provide. They loved my stability because it allowed them to be chaotic. They loved my money because it fixed their mistakes. And now, they loved my house because they wanted it for themselves. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. It was the same feeling I got when I found the fraudulent wire transfer, the hidden ledger, the lie that unraveled the company. It was the feeling of the end. But I smiled. I raised my glass. Actually, I said, that is what I wanted to tell you. My schedule changed. My mother froze. Changed? How? They need me in Tokyo earlier, I lied. There is a compliance issue with the Japanese regulators. I have to fly out of Chicago the morning of the 26th. I watched the reaction ripple around the table. My mother's shoulders dropped 3 inches. My father let out a long, audible exhale. Brielle smiled, genuinely this time. Oh, wow, Brielle said. That is so soon, but you have to go, right? Work is work. Exactly, Dad said. You cannot keep the regulators waiting, so you will leave here tomorrow? Tomorrow afternoon, I confirmed. I will drive back to the city, spend the night at my apartment, and head to O'Hare the next morning. I will be gone for 3 weeks. 3 weeks, my father repeated. He picked up his wineglass. Well, that is a shame. We will miss you, of course, but we understand. He did not look at me. He looked at his phone, the one lying face down on the table. He was already doing the math. She leaves tomorrow. Crew arrives Tuesday. 3 weeks is plenty of time to knock down a wall, patch the drywall, and paint. By the time she gets back, it will be done. She will scream, but she won't be able to put the wall back up. He was calculating the victory. It is a shame, I agreed, but I will make it up to you. Maybe we can all go up to the cabin when I get back in February. Have a proper family weekend. That sounds wonderful, my mother said. Just wonderful. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her palm was warm. Her grip was firm. We are so proud of you. Maeve, you work so hard. I do, I said. I really do. I squeezed her hand back. I let them have their moment. I let them think the chessboard was clear. I let them think the queen had sacrificed herself for the pawns. I finished my wine in one swallow. This is excellent vintage, I said. It is, Dad said. I was saving it for a special occasion. Well, I said, placing the glass down on the white tablecloth. I think this qualifies. I looked at Brielle, who was whispering something to Kyle. I looked at my parents, who were sharing a look of silent conspiracy. Dumpster drop-off confirmed for Tuesday morning. They had ordered a dumpster for my furniture, for my books, for my grandfather's chisels. I felt a terrifying calm settle over me. It was the calm of the executioner. Does anyone want dessert? I asked. I brought gingerbread. I would love some, my mother said. I stood up and gathered the plates. As I walked into the kitchen, I pulled my phone out. I kept my back to the dining room. I opened my calendar app. I deleted the fake Tokyo entry. Then I opened my email and composed a new message to Tessa Hart, the legal counsel at my firm. Subject: urgent/property trespass. Body: Tessa. I need you to draft a cease and desist. Do not send it yet. Prepare for a filing on Tuesday morning. I will provide the evidence of unauthorized entry then. I hit save to drafts. I walked back out to the dining room with the gingerbread platter. They were laughing. My father was pouring more wine. They looked like a family that had just gotten away with murder. Here we go, I said, setting the cookies down in the center of the table. Thanks, Maeve, Dad said. You are a lifesaver. I try, I said. I sat back down and broke the head off a gingerbread man. I chewed it slowly. It was spicy and sweet. I had 24 hours to prepare the trap. Tuesday morning was going to be very interesting. The house finally went silent at 12:30 in the morning. I listened from my bed, waiting for the last floorboard to creak, for the last toilet to flush, for the last murmur of my parents discussing their victory to fade into the heavy. pine-scented dark, when I was sure, absolutely sure, that the performance was over. I stood up and walked to my bedroom door. I turned the lock. The click was small, a tiny mechanical snap of metal against metal, but in the silence of the sleeping house, it sounded like a gunshot. I didn't lock it because I was afraid they would come in. I locked it because I needed the boundary. I needed to know that for the next few hours. The space I occupied was legally and physically mine. I was done with the polite fiction of the open door. I sat down at the small desk in the corner, the one I had used to study for my SATs 15 years ago, and opened my laptop. The screen flared to life, casting a cold blue light over my hands. I didn't turn on the overhead lamp. I liked the dark. It felt like the inside of a server room or the cockpit of a plane, places where I did my best work. I typed in the password for my cloud storage, then navigated to the security interface for the Door County property. My heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. Thump, thump, thump. It wasn't the erratic flutter of panic. It was the heavy hydraulic pumping of adrenaline that hits you right before you open a file that you know is going to get someone fired. I pulled up the master log first. The system was designed to flag unusual activity, but I had set the parameters to be generous because I trusted my neighbors to keep an eye on the place. I hadn't checked the raw data in 2 months because I had been buried in the Florida audit. That was my mistake. Negligence is always the first crime. I scrolled back to November. Entry detected. Front door. November 14th, 10:15 in the morning. User. Spare key 1. I stared at the timestamp. November 14th. That was 6 weeks ago. I was in Miami then, dealing with a hurricane insurance adjuster. I hadn't authorized anyone to be at the cabin. I scrolled down. Entry detected. Front door. November 14th, 2:30 in the afternoon. User. Spare key 1. Entry detected. Side door. November 28th, 9 o'clock in the morning. User. Spare key 1. Entry detected. Front door. December 2nd, 11:45 in the morning. User. Spare key 1. The screen was a wall of text, a digital ledger of trespassing. They hadn't just decided to renovate the cabin over Christmas dinner. This wasn't a whim. This was a campaign. They had been driving up there for months. They had been measuring. They had been planning. They had been living in my house, breathing my air, and walking on my floors while I was hundreds of miles away, believing their texts about how much they missed me. Routine access, I whispered to the empty room. I clicked on the video archive. The system stored footage for 90 days. I selected the date from November 14th and hit play. The video was crisp, high definition, shot from the wide-angle lens of the doorbell camera. It showed my father standing on the porch. He was wearing his heavy canvas barn coat and holding a clipboard. He looked relaxed. He looked confident. He looked like a man surveying his kingdom. A white pickup truck pulled into the frame, crunching over the gravel driveway I had painstakingly laid 3 summers ago. A man got out, heavy-set, wearing a neon orange vest. I didn't recognize him. He wasn't one of the licensed contractors I used. He looked like a handyman, the kind who deals in cash and doesn't ask about permits. My father stepped down off the porch to greet him. I turned up the volume on my laptop, leaning in. The audio was tinny, mixed with the sound of the wind off the lake, but clear enough. "Morning, Mark," the man said. "This the place?" "This is it," my father said. He shook the man's hand, a firm, proprietary shake. "Thanks for coming out. We want to get a jump on things before the snow really hits." "Nice spot," the man said, looking up at the eaves. "Good bones." "Yeah, it's a solid build," Dad said. "My daughter bought it a few years back as a fixer-upper, but she doesn't have the time for the big projects. You know how it is. Corporate job. Keeps her in the city." Sure, the man said. "So we are stepping in," Dad continued, his voice dropping to that reasonable, good guy tone he used when he was negotiating a discount. "We want to open it up, make it more family-friendly. She's got it set up like a museum in there. We need it to be a home." I paused the video. My finger hovered over the spacebar. I looked at my father's frozen face. He wasn't acting maliciously. That was almost worse. He truly believed he was the hero of this story. He believed that by erasing my preferences, he was fixing my life. He was rewriting my reality to fit his narrative. Maeve is too busy. Maeve is cold. Maeve needs us to manage her assets. I felt a cold flash of nausea, but I swallowed it down. I didn't have time to be sick. I had to build the case. I created a new folder on my desktop. I named it evidence_unauthorized_access. I dragged the video file into it. Then I clicked on the next clip, December 2nd. This one was from the camera mounted above the garage. It showed my mother's SUV backing up to the front door. The trunk popped open. My mother got out, followed by Brielle. They were laughing. Brielle was wearing a puffy pink coat and holding a Starbucks cup. She looked like she was on a shopping spree. They started unloading boxes. These weren't my boxes. These were flat-pack cardboard boxes, the long, heavy kind that contained particle board furniture. I zoomed in on the labels: kid store storage unit, primary colors, assembly required. They pulled out a rug. It was rolled up in plastic, but I could see the pattern through the wrapping. It was bright blue with cartoon cars on it. I watched as they dragged the rug into my house, where the floors were 100-year-old reclaimed pine that I cleaned with a specific oil soap. My house, where the color palette was slate, cream, and natural wood. My house, where I went to escape the noise of the world. They were dragging a cartoon rug over my threshold. I switched to the interior camera feed. This was the one I was dreading. The interior cameras were motion-activated. I selected a clip from earlier today, December 24th, just this morning. They must have stopped by on their way to the party. The camera was positioned in the corner of the living room, covering the main seating area and the reading nook I had built under the bay window. When the image resolved, I actually stopped breathing for 3 seconds. My reading nook was gone. The built-in walnut shelves I had installed, shelves that held my first editions, my grandfather's tools, and the driftwood sculptures I had collected, were stripped bare. The wood was gone. The wall where they had been was painted a stark, blinding white. But it wasn't just the shelves. The wall itself looked wrong. There were tape marks on the floor, blue painter's tape outlining where a new structure was going to go. And in the center of the room, pushed up against my vintage leather sofa, were the assembled toy storage units. They were cheap, plastic bins in red and yellow, overflowing with Legos and stuffed animals. It looked like a daycare center had exploded inside a library. I watched my father walk into the frame. He was holding a tape measure. He walked over to the wall that separated the kitchen from the living room, the load-bearing wall, the wall that gave the cabin its structural integrity and kept the kitchen quiet and separate, just the way I liked it. He tapped the wall with his knuckle. "This is the one," he said. He was talking to someone off-camera, presumably the contractor. "If we take this out, we can put an island here, open sightlines. That way, when Brielle is cooking, she can watch the boys in the living room." When Brielle is cooking, he wasn't renovating it for me. He wasn't even pretending anymore. He was renovating it for Brielle. He was custom building a vacation home for his younger daughter, using his older daughter's deed. I watched as he gestured with his hand, a sweeping motion that cut through the air like a blade. "Take it out," he said. "Open the space. We want it all one big room." I hit pause. I stared at the image. My father, arm extended, ordering the destruction of my home. "Take it out." 2 words, 3 syllables, a complete and total violation of property law, trust, and love. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the laptop across the room. The anger that had been simmering in my gut since the kitchen conversation suddenly crystallized into something hard and sharp, like a diamond. This wasn't about decor. This wasn't about family. This was a coup. They were establishing permanence. You don't knock down a load-bearing wall for a weekend visit. You don't paint over custom woodwork for a holiday. You do those things when you are claiming ownership. They were planting a flag. They were betting that once the wall was gone, I would just accept it. They were betting that I would sigh, write a check for the island, and fade into the background, letting Brielle and her open sightlines take over. They were betting on the old Maeve, the Maeve who wanted to be good. But the old Maeve didn't have this footage. I clicked download. I waited for the progress bar to fill. 100% complete. I went back to the live feed. The cabin was dark now, silent in the winter night, but I knew what was waiting there: the tape on the floor, the plastic bins, the ghosts of my shelves. I opened the secure folder again. I created a subfolder named Damages. I began to screenshot the individual frames. Screenshot 1. The unauthorized contractor entering the premises. Screenshot 2. The flat-pack furniture boxes with Brielle's name written on them in marker. Screenshot 3. My father pointing at the load-bearing wall. Screenshot 4. The stripped wall where my grandfather's tools used to hang. I logged every image. I timestamped them. I cross-referenced them with the spare key entries in the access log. Then, I did something even colder. I opened the User Management tab of the Smart Lock system. I saw the list of active keys. User, Maeve, Owner, User, Maintenance, Inactive. User, Mom and Dad, spare key 1. I hovered my cursor over the delete button next to Mom and Dad. My finger twitched. If I deleted it now, they wouldn't be able to get in on Tuesday. The contractor would be locked out. The surprise would be ruined. But that would be too easy. If I locked them out now, they would just call me. They would say the key was broken. They would ask for the code. They would spin a story about needing to check the furnace. They would manipulate me. No. I needed them to get in. I needed them to open the door. I needed them to walk into the trap. I left the key active. Instead, I set up a notification alert. Rule: immediate SMS and email alert upon entry of user, Mom and Dad. Rule: initiate continuous video recording upon entry. I wanted to see their faces when the sheriff arrived. I closed the security system. I minimized the browser. I looked at the desktop of my laptop, clutter-free and organized. I felt a strange sense of detachment. I was floating above the house, looking down at the sleeping figures of my family. I saw them for what they were: small, grasping people who thought the world owed them a living because they were nice. They thought intent mattered more than impact. They thought love was a valid legal defense for theft. They were about to learn a very expensive lesson in compliance. I checked the time. It was 1:45 in the morning. I needed to sleep. I had a performance to give at breakfast. I had to drive back to the city, pack a bag, and pretend to go to the airport. I had to look my mother in the eye and let her kiss my cheek, knowing that in 48 hours, she would be trying to explain to a county inspector why she had authorized a demolition on a house she didn't own. I shut the laptop. I walked over to the bed and slid under the heavy down comforter. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling. I thought about the wall my father wanted to take out. It was a good wall. It held up the second floor. It kept the house standing. "You are not taking it out," I whispered. I closed my eyes. And for the first time in months, I slept without dreaming. The anxiety was gone. I had a plan. And unlike my family, I always finished what I started. I left my parents' house at 9 o'clock on Christmas morning. The performance was flawless. I hugged my mother, who smelled of coffee and expensive moisturizer. I shook my father's hand, feeling the calluses that he used to convince himself he was still a blue-collar hero. I even high-fived Brielle, who was already wearing the cashmere scarf I had bought her, looking for all the world like the innocent beneficiary of a crime she didn't know was happening. "Safe travels," my mother called from the porch, waving as I backed the rental car out of the driveway. "Text us when you land in Tokyo." "I will," I promised. I drove until I hit the interstate. Then I pulled into the empty parking lot of a closed gas station and killed the engine. The silence inside the car was absolute. I picked up my phone and dialed Tessa Hart. Tessa is the general counsel for Northline Compliance Partners. She is a woman who has stared down SEC investigators, hostile boards, and federal prosecutors without blinking. We have a standing agreement. I find the mess, and she builds the containment wall. It was Christmas Day. I knew she would answer. Tessa doesn't do holidays. She does billable hours and crisis management. The phone rang twice. Stevens, her voice came through the speaker, crisp and devoid of festive cheer. This better be good. I was about to open a bottle of vintage Pinot. It is not good, I said. It is a breach, but it is personal. There was a pause on the line. I heard the click of a lighter, then a long exhale. Personal breach. That is a new one for you. Talk to me. My parents have accessed my Door County property without authorization, I said, keeping my voice flat. They have removed furniture. They have engaged a contractor. They plan to demolish a load-bearing wall starting tomorrow morning. They believe I am on a flight to Tokyo. Jesus, Tessa muttered. The family legacy play? Exactly. They are remodeling it for my sister. Okay, Tessa said. The rustle of papers shifted in the background. I could hear her brain switching gears from annoyed friend to litigator. Let's strip the emotion out of this. What is the goal? Maeve? Do you want a family conversation where everyone cries and promises to do better? Or do you want a legal boundary that actually holds water? I looked out the windshield at the gray sky. I thought about the open sightlines. I thought about my grandfather's tools, likely shoved into a cardboard box in the garage. I thought about the weeks of lying, the coordinated deception, the spare key manipulation. I want a boundary, I said. I want the work stopped immediately. I want the damages documented. I want the chain of evidence preserved so airtight that they cannot claim it was a misunderstanding. Understood, Tessa said. First things first, the deed. Is it in your name only? Solely, I confirmed. Maeve Stevens, no trust, no cosigners. I paid the down payment, the mortgage, the property taxes, and the insurance premiums from my personal account. Good. That simplifies things. But here is the risk, Tessa said, her voice sharpening. If they have been accessing the property for months, as you suspect, and you haven't reported it, their lawyer, if they get one, could argue implied permission. They could say you knew about it and acquiesced. If the insurance company gets wind of unauthorized construction and you didn't flag it, they will deny any claim for damage. You need to be on record as opposing this before the sledgehammer hits the wall. I have the security logs, I said. I have video of unauthorized entry. I have the spare key usage data. I never gave them permission to renovate. That is good for court, Tessa said. But we need to stop the contractor. A contractor won't touch a wall without a permit. Usually. Have you checked the county records? Not yet. Check them. Now. Door County has an online portal. Search by address. If there is a permit, I need to know whose name is on it. Hold on, I said. I put Tessa on speaker and opened my laptop, tethering it to my phone's hotspot. My fingers flew across the keyboard. Door County Land Use Services. Permit search. I typed in my address. The system spun for a moment. The little circle buffering. Result found. I felt a chill go down my spine. Permit application number. DC 20258-894. Type, interior remodel/structural alteration. Status, approved. Applicant, Maeve Stevens. I stared at the screen. Tessa, I said, my voice tight. There is a permit. It is approved, and it lists me as the applicant. Did you apply for it? No. Then we have fraud, Tessa said, her voice dropping an octave. Who is the contact email? I clicked on the details. Email, maeve.remodels, gmail.com. It is a fake email. I said, that is not my address. It is a burner account. And the phone number? I looked at the number listed under owner representative. It wasn't my number, but it looked familiar. I pulled up my contacts on my phone and cross-referenced it. I closed my eyes. It is Brielle's number, I said. Silence stretched over the line. Your sister impersonated you to file a construction permit? Tessa asked. The disbelief in her voice was rare. It looks that way, I said. Or my father used her number. Either way, they filed a government document using my name and her contact info. Maeve, Tessa said, and for the first time, she sounded deadly serious. This isn't just entitlement anymore. This is identity theft. This is forgery. Filing a fraudulent permit application is a crime. If that wall comes down and someone gets hurt, or if the house collapses, you are liable because you applied for it. They have exposed you to massive legal risk. I know, I said. The anger was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. They hadn't just betrayed me. They had weaponized my identity. They had used my name to authorize the destruction of my own property. Okay, Tessa said. Here is the play. We do not call the police yet. That is the nuclear option, and once you ring that bell, you can't unring it. We go the administrative route. We get the county inspector involved. How? I will draft a formal notice of unauthorized activity and email it to the Door County Building Inspector's office immediately. I will state that you, the property owner, did not file the permit and that the work is unauthorized. I will demand a stop work order. But it is Christmas. The office is closed. The contractor starts tomorrow morning, I said. The 26th. Right. So you need to be there, Tessa said. You need to physically be on site when the inspector arrives. I will try to get a deputy to meet you there for a civil standby. That way. If your father tries to claim he has rights, you have law enforcement there to say, "Show me the deed." I can do that, I said. I am driving up there now. I will stay at a motel in town tonight. Do not go to the cabin tonight, Tessa warned. If you go there tonight and confront them, it becomes a domestic dispute. The police hate domestic disputes. They will tell you to work it out. You need to catch them in the act of construction. You need the contractor there with his tools. You need the permit on display. That makes it a regulatory violation. Got it, I said. Wait for the trap to snap. Exactly. And Maeve? Yeah? We are adding a restraining notice to the file, Tessa said. Once we prove the permit is fake. We file to have Brielle and your parents barred from the property, no more spare keys, no more family visits. If they show up, they get arrested for trespassing. Do it, I said. I will start drafting. You get to the motel. Send me the screenshots of the permit and the fake email. And Maeve, try to eat something. You sound like you're running on fumes. I am running on rage. Tessa, I said. It is a cleaner fuel. I hung up. I sat in the car for a moment, staring at the permit on my screen. Applicant. Maeve Stevens. They had stolen my name. They had stolen my voice. They had decided that I was so irrelevant to my own life that they could just wear me like a costume to get what they wanted. I took a screenshot of the permit. I took a screenshot of the fake email address. I took a screenshot of the phone number field with Brielle's digits. Then I put the car in drive. I drove north. The landscape changed from the suburban sprawl of Madison to the rolling, snow-covered fields of central Wisconsin. The sky was a flat, slate gray. The roads were clear, just as I had predicted. I didn't listen to music. I listened to the hum of the tires on the pavement. I rehearsed the conversation in my head. Not the screaming match my mother would want. Not the guilt trip my father would try. But the cold, factual dismantling of their reality. I arrived in Sturgeon Bay, the gateway to Door County, around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The town was quiet, the holiday lights twinkling in the early dusk. I checked into a generic chain motel near the highway. The clerk looked at me with pity, a woman alone on Christmas Day. But I didn't care. I went to my room. It smelled of bleach and pine cleaner. I set up my command center on the small round table. Laptop, phone, notepad. I checked the cabin feed. The house was dark. My parents had left. They were probably back at the rental house they had booked for the week. Or maybe they were staying with friends. It didn't matter. They would be there tomorrow at 8 a.m. to greet the contractor. I spent the next 3 hours building the file. I downloaded the deed from the county registry. I downloaded my insurance policy declarations page. I downloaded the tax assessment showing my payments for the last 4 years. I created a document titled Timeline of Unauthorized Access, November 14th. Entry by Mark Stevens, December 2nd. Entry by Elaine and Brielle Stevens. Delivery of furniture, December 24th. Entry by Mark Stevens. Planning of structural demolition, December 25th. Discovery of fraudulent permit application filed by Brielle Stevens. It looked like a criminal indictment. At 8 o'clock, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Tessa. Drafts ready. Inspector's office emailed. I marked it. Emergency/fraud. I also called a contact I have in the sheriff's department up there. Deputy Miller will meet you at the property line at 8:30 tomorrow. He knows it is a civil standby, but I told him about the permit fraud. He is interested. I typed back, "Thank you. You are a shark." Tessa replied, "Sharks don't celebrate Christmas. Get some sleep." I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the snow start to fall again. I thought about Brielle, my little sister, the one I had protected from bullies on the playground, the one I had bought prom dresses for, the one I had bailed out of every bad decision she ever made. She had used my name. She had impersonated me. She had looked at a legal document that required the signature of the property owner, and she had thought, I will just be Maeve. She won't mind. That was the part that cut the deepest. It wasn't the malice. It was the casualness of it. The assumption that my identity was community property. Tomorrow, I would take it back. I checked the weather one last time. Clear skies in the morning. Good visibility. Perfect conditions for a demolition. The morning of December 26th broke with a sky the color of a bruised plum. It was 6:30 in the morning when I woke up in the motel room in Sturgeon Bay. The air inside the room was stale, recycled heat, and the faint chemical scent of industrial laundry detergent. I did not feel tired. I felt the strange, vibrating clarity that comes right before a deposition. I showered quickly, dressing in layers, thermal leggings, heavy denim, a wool sweater, and my insulated parka. I wasn't dressing for a family holiday. I was dressing for a site inspection in 0-degree weather. I pulled my hair back into a tight, severe bun, no loose strands, no softness. At 7:15, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was my father. I stared at the screen for a moment, letting it ring. Incoming call. Dad. I picked it up on the third ring, pitching my voice to sound breathless and distracted, surrounded by the imaginary noise of an airport terminal. "Hi, Dad," I said. "I can't talk long. I am just getting through security." "Good morning, honey," Mark's voice crackled through the speaker. I could hear the clatter of silverware in the background. He was at breakfast, likely sitting at the rental house table, drinking his coffee, feeling the warm satisfaction of a plan coming together. "I just wanted to catch you before you flew out. Did you make it to O'Hare okay?" "I am there now," I lied. "It is a zoo, but I am at the gate." Good," he said, his voice dropping to that serious, fatherly register. "Listen, I am glad you decided to fly out early. I was just looking at the weather report for Door County again. It is nasty up there. Maeve, black ice everywhere. They are saying cars are sliding off the road left and right." I walked over to the motel window and pulled back the curtain. The parking lot was dry. The highway beyond was clear asphalt, dusted with a fine layer of salt. The sun was trying to break through the clouds. It was a perfectly drivable winter day. "That sounds dangerous," I said, watching a delivery truck rumble past on the highway without even tapping its brakes. "I am glad I'm not there." "Exactly," Mark said. "You stay safe in Tokyo. Don't worry about the cabin. Your mother and I will drive up later today just to check the thermostat. Maybe shovel the walk, but we won't stay long. It is too risky." "Okay, Dad," I said. "Thanks for checking on it. I have to go." "They are calling my group." "Love you, kiddo," he said. "Bye." I hung up. The lie tasted like copper in my mouth. He wasn't checking the thermostat. He was clearing the conscience. He needed to establish one last time that I was thousands of miles away, and that the location of the crime was inaccessible to me due to weather. He was building his own defense, albeit a clumsy one. I packed my laptop and the external hard drive into my bag. I checked out of the motel without speaking to the clerk. I drove to a gas station on Highway 42, the main artery leading north into the peninsula. There are only 2 ways to get to my cabin, and this was the one my father always took because he claimed the other route had too many speed traps. I parked my rental car, a gray sedan that blended perfectly into the slush-colored landscape, at the far end of the lot. Facing the road, I bought a black coffee and waited. It was a game of patience now. I knew their timeline. The text message on his phone had said the crew arrived at 8 o'clock. My parents would want to be there before the contractor to open the door and supervise at 7:45. I saw them. My father's dark blue SUV swept past the gas station. It was moving fast, confident. I could see 2 silhouettes in the front seat. My mother was gesturing, probably talking about paint swatches or where the Christmas tree would go next year. They looked happy. They looked like people heading toward a victory lap. I gave them a count of 10. 1, 2, 3. I put the sedan in drive and pulled out onto the highway. I kept 3 cars between us. I didn't need to see their bumper. I just needed to follow the wake. I turned off the location services on my phone. I didn't want Brielle checking Find My Friends and seeing me trailing them like a shark in the water. My hands were steady on the wheel. The heater hummed. The landscape rolled by. Dormant cherry orchards, frozen fields, the gray expanse of the bay peeking through the trees. It was beautiful, in a stark, frozen way. This was the landscape I loved. This was the silence I paid for. And they were up ahead, rushing to fill it with noise. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. A secure text from Tessa. Update. County inspector is confirmed. He is not happy about coming out on the 26th. But I sent him the permit fraud evidence. He is bringing a cease and desist order. Deputy Miller is on standby at the substation. 5 minutes out. Documentation checklist is ready. Do not engage until the work starts. I dictated a reply. Copy. Targets are 2 minutes from site. I am 1 minute behind them. I turned off the main road onto the gravel lane that led to my property. I didn't drive all the way to the driveway. Instead, I pulled into a small, unpaved logging turnout about 200 yards down the road. It was screened by a thick line of cedar trees. I cut the engine. I was close enough to walk, but far enough to remain invisible. I opened my laptop on the passenger seat and tethered it to my phone. I brought up the security feed. The camera lag was less than a second. The screen showed my driveway. The blue SUV was parked right in front of the porch. The trunk was open. My father was already out, wrestling a large, flat box out of the back. My mother was unlocking the front door. I zoomed in. She wasn't using a key. She was punching a code into the smart lock. Entry detected. Front door. User, Mom and Dad. The notification popped up on my screen in a bright red banner. I watched them enter. The lights in the cabin flickered on. They moved with the ease of ownership, flinging their coats onto the entryway bench, my bench, the one I had restored from a church pew. A white van pulled into the driveway behind the SUV. The side of the van read Harborview Renovations. 2 men got out. One was the heavy-set man from the previous video. The other was younger, carrying a tool belt and a reciprocating saw. My father came out to greet them. He was smiling, shaking hands, clapping the older man on the shoulder. He pointed to the house. He pointed to the sky. He was the lord of the manor, directing the serfs. I toggled to the interior feed. The living room was suddenly crowded. The contractors walked in with their muddy boots. Not bothering to put down drop cloths, they marched right over my vintage runner. My father led them to the kitchen wall. He tapped it. He made a chopping motion with his hand. The younger contractor nodded and started plugging an extension cord into the outlet. The outlet I had wired myself. I felt a surge of adrenaline, cold and sharp. This was it. The physical act of destruction was about to begin. But then, I saw something else. On the edge of the frame, near the front door. My mother was clearing space. She was making room for the new flat-pack furniture boxes. To do this, she was moving the existing items out of the way. She picked up a wooden box from the side table. My breath hitched in my throat. It was a simple box, made of cherry wood, with dovetail joints. My grandfather had made it for me when I was 10 years out. Inside, it held his sharpening stones, a few handwritten notes he had left me about woodworking, and the small brass compass he had carried in the war. It was the most valuable thing I owned, not in dollars, but in soul. My mother didn't open it. She didn't look at it with nostalgia. She didn't treat it like a family heirloom. She picked it up with one hand, as if it were a piece of clutter, a nuisance blocking her vision of the new, open-concept playroom. She walked to the front door, opened it, and set the box outside on the porch. She didn't place it gently on a table. She stacked it on top of a pile of old newspapers and recycling that I had left to go out. She put my grandfather's memory on the trash pile. Then she went back inside and started dragging a plastic slide into the living room. I sat in the frozen car, staring at the screen. The world narrowed down to that wooden box sitting on the concrete porch. Exposed to the biting wind, that box was the reason I had bought this house. That box was the reason I had learned to use a table saw. That box was the only piece of unconditional love I had ever received in this family, and she had just discarded it to make room for a plastic toy. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. It was hot and angry. I wiped it away with a gloved hand. I didn't scream. I didn't get out of the car and run up the driveway to save the box. Not yet. I needed the record. I opened the voice memo app on my phone. I hit record. My voice was steady, terrifyingly calm. Date: December 26th, 2026. Time: 8:12 in the morning. Location: 550 Cedar Lane. This is Maeve Stevens. I am currently observing unauthorized entry into my property. My parents, Mark and Elaine Stevens, have admitted a contractor, Harborview Renovations, to the premises. They are currently preparing to demolish a load-bearing wall. I paused, watching the screen. The younger contractor was holding the saw. He was testing the trigger, the blade blurred. I have just witnessed Elaine Stevens remove personal property belonging to me, specifically a cherry wood box containing my late grandfather's effects, and place it outside on the porch in sub-freezing temperatures, treating it as refuse. This item is irreplaceable. This action demonstrates a willful disregard for my property and a hostile intent to displace my ownership. I stopped the recording. I saved the file. Evidence_item_removal. I looked at the screen one last time. The saw was inches from the drywall. My father was standing back, arms crossed, watching with pride. They had no idea that their entire world was about to collapse. They thought they were building a playroom. They were actually building a criminal record. I opened my text thread with Tessa. I typed one word: proceed. I hit send. I watched the bubble turn blue. Then I put the car in gear. I didn't turn on the headlights. I let the car roll forward, the tires crunching softly on the snow, moving out of the shadows and toward the kill. The montage was over. The planning was done. It was time to introduce myself. The arrival of the authorities was almost disappointingly quiet. I was expecting noise, in my head. I had scored this moment with the frantic energy of a raid, sirens cutting through the winter air, tires screeching on the gravel, the dramatic shouting of orders. But reality, as I have learned in my line of work, is rarely that cinematic. The machinery of the state does not need to scream to be heard. It simply arrives, heavy and inevitable. Two vehicles turned off the main highway and crunched slowly down my lane. They were not patrol cars. They were nondescript, beige sedans with the county seal decals on the doors. They moved with the unhurried pace of bureaucracy. I watched from my vantage point in the logging turnout, my breath clouding the windshield. My laptop was open on the passenger seat, the screen glowing with the live feed from inside the cabin. The first car parked directly behind the contractor's white van, blocking it in. The second car parked parallel to my father's SUV. 3 people got out. One was a uniformed deputy, a man with a thick mustache and a posture that suggested he would rather be anywhere else on the day after Christmas. The other two were civilians in heavy parkas, holding clipboards. One was the building inspector, a man I recognized from the county website as Mr. Henderson. The other was a woman I did not know, likely a code enforcement officer. They did not run. They walked up the driveway with the casual indifference of people who were just doing a job. I turned up the volume on my laptop. The interior microphone picked up the sound of the reciprocating saw whining against the drywall. It was a high-pitched, grinding shriek that made my teeth ache. On the screen, I saw the front door open. The deputy knocked. 3 hard. Authoritative raps on the wood frame, and then stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. The door had been left unlocked for the workers. "County Sheriff's Department," the deputy announced. His voice was flat, cutting through the noise of the saw like a knife. "Building inspector, cut the power." The saw stopped instantly. The silence that followed was heavy. It was the sudden, ringing silence of a party where the music has been abruptly unplugged. I watched the scene unfold on my screen like a play in a black box theater. My father was standing in the center of the living room, holding a roll of blueprints he had likely drawn himself. The contractor, the heavy-set man, lowered his tool belt. The younger worker looked terrified, unplugging the saw and backing away toward the kitchen island. "What is this?" my father demanded. He stepped forward, putting on his concerned citizen face. He adjusted his glasses, trying to look like the reasonable man in the room. "Is there a problem, officer? We are just doing some light renovation." Mr. Henderson, the inspector, stepped around the deputy. He didn't look at my father. He looked at the wall, my wall, which now sported a jagged, 2-foot gash in the drywall where the saw had just bitten in. "I need to see the permit for this structural alteration," Henderson said. He didn't ask. He ordered. "Of course," my father said, letting out a laugh that was a little too loud. "It is all approved. My daughter," he gestured vaguely to the room. "She filed it last week. We have the paperwork right here." He turned to the contractor. "Show them the email. Jim," the contractor, Jim, wiped his hands on his pants and pulled a folded piece of paper from his back pocket. He handed it to the inspector. "We got the go-ahead on Tuesday," Jim said, his voice defensive. "Everything is above board. Deposit paid. Permit number is on the sheet." Henderson looked at the paper. He took a pen from his pocket and tapped the document. "This permit application lists the owner as Maeve Stevens," Henderson said. "That is my daughter," my mother chimed in. She had been standing near the window, arranging the plastic bins. Now she moved forward, smiling her best hostess smile. "She is in Tokyo right now for business. We are handling this as a surprise for her return." "Tokyo," Henderson repeated. He looked at the deputy, then back at my father. "That is interesting, because the building department received a frantic affidavit this morning from a Maeve Stevens stating that she is currently in Wisconsin, that she did not file this permit, and that she did not authorize any demolition." The air left the room. My father's smile faltered. It didn't disappear, but it froze, turning brittle at the edges. That is impossible. There must be a mix-up, a clerical error. I am Mark Stevens. I am her father. I have the spare key." "Possession of a key is not proof of ownership, sir," the deputy said. He stepped closer, his hand resting casually on his belt. "And filing a fraudulent permit application is a felony. So is identity theft." "Identity theft?" my mother gasped. Her hand flew to her chest, clutching her pearl necklace. "We are her parents. We are fixing up her house. How can you accuse us of stealing?" "The permit was filed using an email address that doesn't match the owner's records," Henderson continued, reading from his clipboard. "And the contact number listed belongs to a Brielle Stevens. Is one of you Brielle?" "That is her sister," my father said quickly. "Look, this is just a family misunderstanding. My daughters, they don't always communicate well. Maeve probably forgot she authorized it. She works very hard. She gets confused." I gripped the steering wheel of my car. She gets confused. He was doing it again. He was rewriting reality to make me the incompetent one, the broken one, the one who needed to be managed. The affidavit included video evidence of unauthorized entry dating back to November, Henderson said. He looked up, his eyes hard. And it included a request for a restraining order. This isn't a mix-up. Mr. Stevens, this is a crime scene. I am issuing a stop work order effective immediately. He slapped a bright orange sticker onto the drywall, right next to the gash. You need to vacate the premises, the deputy said. Now, all of you. The contractor, Jim, looked at my father. The camaraderie was gone. The good old boy network had dissolved. Now, Jim looked like a man who realized he wasn't getting paid. You said you had power of attorney, Jim accused, pointing a thick finger at my father. You told me she signed off on the scope. She did, my father insisted, though his voice was cracking. She knows. She implicitly knows. Show me the signature, the inspector said. My father floundered. He looked at my mother. He looked at the contractor. He looked at the phone in his hand, as if he could conjure a text message from me that would absolve him. I don't have it on me, Mark stammered. It was verbal. It was a family agreement. Verbal doesn't cut through load-bearing walls, Henderson said dryly. Pack it up. My mother started to cry. It wasn't a silent, dignified weeping. It was a loud, bewildered sobbing. I don't understand, she wailed, looking around the room as if the walls themselves had betrayed her. We just wanted it to be nice. We wanted it to be for the family. Why would she do this? Why would she call the police on us? We are her parents. She is in Tokyo, my father muttered. Shaking his head, he looked disoriented. She is in Tokyo. She couldn't know. Who told her? Did the neighbors call? I watched them on the screen. They were spinning. They were crashing against the rocks of a reality they had ignored for 30 years. That I was a separate person with my own rights. It was time. I closed the laptop. I unplugged the cable. I put the computer in my bag. I opened the car door. The cold air hit me like a physical slap. Sharp and cleansing, I stepped out onto the gravel. I was wearing my heavy boots, the ones I used for site inspections. They made a distinct, rhythmic crunch on the frozen ground. Crunch, crunch, crunch. I walked out from behind the cedar trees. I walked down the shoulder of the road. I turned into the driveway. I didn't rush. I walked with the steady, measured pace of an auditor walking toward a non-compliant boardroom. I saw the deputy standing on the porch. He saw me coming. He tapped his radio, saying something I couldn't hear. But he didn't stop me. He recognized the walk. He recognized the ownership. I walked up the driveway, past the contractor's van. I saw Jim, the contractor, hauling his saw back to the truck. He looked up at me. He saw the resemblance, the jawline, the eyes. He stopped. He knew exactly who I was. I didn't know, lady, he muttered, holding up his hands. They told me it was family property. It is not family property, I said. My voice was low, clear, and carried no inflection. It is private property. I kept walking. I reached the porch steps. I saw the recycling pile. I saw the cherry wood box, sitting askew on top of a stack of wet newspapers. The lid was slightly open, exposed to the damp air. I didn't pick it up, not yet. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me scramble to save what they had discarded. I walked to the front door. The deputy stepped aside. Ms. Stevens? He asked. Yes, I said. Thank you for coming. Deputy, I stepped across the threshold. The heat inside the cabin was stifling. It smelled of sawdust, stale coffee, and my mother's perfume. My father was standing by the fireplace, arguing with the inspector. My mother was sitting on one of the plastic bins, weeping into a tissue. They didn't see me at first. The sun was behind me, casting a long shadow into the room. I am telling you, my father was saying, his face red. If you just let me call her. You don't need to call me, I said. The sound of my voice stopped the room cold. My father spun around. My mother gasped, dropping the tissue. They looked at me. They looked at my coat, my boots, my face. They looked for the daughter who smiled and wrote checks. They looked for the daughter who apologized for taking up space. She wasn't there. "Maeve," my mother whispered, "I thought you were in Tokyo." "I am not in Tokyo," I said. "I am standing in my living room." I walked further into the room. I looked around. The visual gut punch was worse than it had been on the screen. On the screen, it was just pixels. In person, it was a violation of physics. My reading nook was gone. The custom walnut shelves I had built with my own hands were ripped out. The drywall was scarred with holes where they had used a crowbar to pry the wood loose. The wood itself was gone, likely thrown in a dumpster or burned. The walls, which I had painted a deep, calming slate gray, were now patched with bright, mismatched swatches of cheerful yellow and beige, as if they were testing colors for a nursery. And the floor, my beautiful 100-year-old pine floor, there were muddy boot prints everywhere. There were scratches from where they had dragged the plastic furniture, but the worst part was the feeling. The silence I had cultivated, the sanctuary I had built, was gone. The air felt frantic. It felt cheap. It felt like a strip mall daycare center. They had taken my temple and turned it into a playpen. I looked at the gash in the wall. The dust was still settling in the air, dancing in the shafts of light. I turned to my father. He was staring at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He looked smaller than I remembered. He looked like a man who had been caught shoplifting. "Maeve," he started, his voice wavering between anger and relief. "Thank God you are here. Tell these people. Tell them it is fine. Tell them we are family." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had taught me that love was a transaction. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. "Officer," I said, turning to the deputy, "I would like these people removed from my property. They are trespassing." "Maeve," my mother shrieked, "we are your parents." "I know who you are," I said, "and I know what you did. You forged my name, you stole my identity, and you destroyed my home." "We were fixing it," my father shouted, finally snapping. "We were making it better. For the family. For Brielle. Why are you so selfish? Why is it always about you?" "It is not about me," I said calmly. "It is about the deed." I pulled the folded copy of the deed from my pocket. I handed it to the deputy. "Please remove them," I said, "and if they refuse, arrest them." The room went dead silent. My father looked at me, and for the first time in his life, he realized that he had no power. He had no leverage. He had no daughter to manipulate. He was just a man standing in a stranger's house, holding a blueprint for a wall he had no right to tear down. The silence in the room was not empty. It was heavy, pressurized, and vibrating with the dust of the drywall my father had just ordered destroyed. My mother moved first. It was a reflex she had honed over 30 years of smoothing over my father's tantrums and my sister's disasters. She wiped her eyes with a crumpled tissue, adjusted her coat, and stepped toward me with her arms open. Her face arranged itself into a mask of wounded affection, the kind she used when she wanted to guilt me into hosting Thanksgiving or lending Brielle money. "Oh, Maeve," she breathed, her voice trembling with a curated fragility. "Thank heavens you are here. This whole thing is just a terrible mix-up. These men are being so aggressive. Come here. Give Mom a hug, and we can sort this out." She reached for me. Her hands, manicured and shaking slightly, aimed for my shoulders. She wanted to physically anchor me back into the role of the dutiful daughter. If she could touch me, she could claim me. If she could claim me, she could dismiss the police. I did not step back. I did not flinch. I simply raised my left hand, palm out, and held it in the space between us. It was a stop sign. "Do not touch me," I said. The words were not loud, but they landed like stones dropped into a frozen lake. Elaine froze. Her hands hovered in the air. Rejected. She looked at me as if I had just slapped her. "Maeve? Honey?" "I am not your honey right now," I said, my voice stripping away the familial shorthand. I am the property owner who just walked into a crime scene." My father pushed past her. He was not looking for a hug. He was looking for control. Mark Stevens was a man who believed that volume and proximity were valid debating tactics. He marched up to me, invading my personal space, his face flushed with the indignation of a patriarch who had been questioned by a subordinate. "Stop this," he barked. He pointed a finger at the deputy, then at the inspector. "Maeve, tell them it is fine. Tell them to pack up their gear and get out of our house. This is embarrassing. You are embarrassing us in front of the neighbors." He spoke to me with the exact cadence he used when I was 12 years old and had forgotten to take out the recycling. He expected me to shrink. He expected me to apologize for the inconvenience of my own victimization. "End this now," he ordered. "Tell them you gave us permission so we can get back to work." I looked at him. I looked at the veins pulsing in his neck. I looked at the sawdust on his expensive loafers. "I did not come here to fix this for you," I said. My father blinked. "What?" "I did not come here to make the police go away," I continued, my voice steady and cold. "I came here to make sure they file the report correctly." I turned away from him. Breaking the dynamic. I looked directly at Deputy Miller and Inspector Henderson. I squared my shoulders. "Officer, Inspector," I said, pitching my voice to be heard clearly by everyone in the room, including the contractor who was nervously packing his drill in the corner. "Let me be absolute. I am the sole owner of this property. I hold the deed, the mortgage, and the insurance. I did not hire Harborview Renovations. I did not authorize any demolition. I did not sign any permit application. And I certainly did not give Mark or Elaine Stevens permission to alter this structure." "She is lying," my father shouted. Desperation was starting to crack his voice. "She gave us a key. We have a key." He fumbled in his pocket and pulled out the brass key I had given them 3 years ago. He held it up like a holy relic, thrusting it toward the deputy. "Look," Mark yelled. "She gave this to us. You don't give a key to someone you don't trust. A key is permission. It implies consent for access and management. Any judge would see that." "That is a good point," the deputy said. Looking at me, "Possession of a key does imply some level of access, Ms. Stevens. It implies access for emergencies," I corrected. "Not for demolition, but let's talk about that key." I walked over to the kitchen island, where I had set down my bag. I pulled out a folder. Inside were the printouts I had prepared in the motel room. I handed the first sheet to the deputy. "That key is not just a piece of metal," I said, turning back to my father. "It is a physical token paired with a digital log. I have a smart lock system that tracks every single entry and exit by user code and physical override. I know exactly when that key was used." My father lowered his hand. The key suddenly looked less like a weapon and more like a trap. "You said you were checking the pipes," I said to him, "but the logs show you were here on November 14th for 4 hours. You were here on December 2nd for 6 hours. You were here on December 12th. I handed the deputy a second sheet. "These are the corresponding video logs from the interior security cameras." My mother went pale. "Cameras?" she whispered. "I saw you," I said, looking at her. "I saw you bring in the rug. I saw you measuring the walls. I saw you discussing how to open up the space for Brielle. I saw you throw my grandfather's box on the porch 20 minutes ago. We didn't know the cameras were on," my mother stammered. "We thought you turned them off when you weren't here." "Why would I turn off my security system when I'm not here?" I asked. "That is exactly when I need it." "This is entrapment," my father shouted, pivoting to a new defense. "You watched us? You watched us for months and didn't say anything? You let us do this." "I let you dig the hole," I said. "You are the one who jumped in?" "It doesn't matter," Mark insisted, though he was sweating now. "We are family. Family doesn't sue family. We were doing a nice thing. We were going to surprise you." "You were going to destroy my asset," I said. "But let's talk about the permit, because that is where family ends and felony begins." I turned to Inspector Henderson. "You said the application was filed electronically?" That is correct, Henderson said. Last week. And the contact number? I asked. It ends in 4492. Henderson read from his clipboard. I pulled out my phone. I dialed Brielle's number. I put it on speakerphone and held it up. The room was silent. We could all hear the ringing tone. Ring, ring. Hello? Brielle's voice chirped through the speaker. She sounded happy, unburdened. Maeve, did you land? Are you in Tokyo? No. Brielle, I said. I am in Door County. I am standing in my living room with Mom, Dad, a sheriff's deputy, and the building inspector. There was a pause, a long, suffocating pause. Oh, Brielle said. Her voice went small. Is the wall down yet? My mother flinched. The wall is damaged, I said. But we are talking about the permit. Brielle, the inspector has a record of a permit filed in my name, but the contact number is yours. Did you file a permit application pretending to be me? Brielle stammered. I mean, Dad told me to. He said you were too busy to deal with the paperwork. He said you wouldn't mind if I just helped out. My father's head snapped up. I didn't tell you to sign her name, he shouted at the phone. I told you to handle the logistics. I didn't tell you to commit fraud. You stood right there. Brielle's voice rose, shrill and panicked. You stood right there while I filled out the online form. You read me her social security number from your old tax files. You said, just put Maeve. It is her house. It has to be her name or they won't approve it. Social security number, the deputy repeated. He pulled a notepad from his pocket. Identity theft. Fraudulent use of an identifier. Elaine turned on the phone. The united front, the we did it for the family narrative, disintegrated in seconds. Brielle, Elaine hissed at the speakerphone. What did you do? You told us you spoke to Maeve. You told us she gave the go-ahead. I never said that, Brielle cried. You guys said she was on board but distracted. You said we just needed to get it done. Why are you yelling at me? I am the one with the kids. I am the one who needs the space. Stop talking, I said to the phone. Brielle, listen to me closely. You are going to hang up now. You are not going to delete anything because the digital footprint is already preserved, and if you try to lie to the inspector later, it will only get worse. Maeve, please, Brielle sobbed. I didn't mean it. I hung up. I looked at my parents. They were standing in the wreckage of their own lies. My father looked diminished, his bluster replaced by the terrifying realization that his younger daughter had just implicated him in a federal crime. My mother looked at my father with horror. Not because of what he had done, but because the consequences were finally real. You used her, I said to my father. You used Brielle's phone number because you didn't want the confirmation email coming to me. You set her up. I was trying to help her, my father whispered. She needs a win. Maeve, she is struggling. You have everything. You have the job, the money, the house. Why couldn't you just give her this? Because it is mine, I said. I turned to the inspector. Mr. Henderson, I said. I am formally requesting that you enforce the stop work order. I am also requesting a full damage assessment for the unauthorized demolition. Granted, Henderson said. He was writing furiously on his clipboard. And deputy, I said, turning to the officer, I want a formal trespass warning issued to Mark and Elaine Stevens. They are to surrender the key immediately. If they return to this property without my express written consent, I want them arrested. Maeve, my mother cried, you can't be serious. We are your parents. You can't ban us from your home. It is not a home to you, I said. It is a resource, and I am closing the account. I held out my hand to my father. The key. He looked at me. His eyes were wet, red-rimmed with anger and humiliation. He looked at the deputy, whose hand was resting near his handcuffs. Slowly, painfully. My father placed the brass key in my palm. You are a cold woman, Maeve, he spat. Your grandfather would be ashamed of you. My grandfather built the shelves you just tore down, I replied. And he taught me that a man who doesn't respect wood doesn't respect anything. I think he would be just fine with this." I closed my fingers around the key. It was cold metal, but it felt like victory. "Now," I said, checking my watch. "I have a contractor to fire and a wall to assess. You need to leave. All of you. Who is going to pay for this?" The contractor, Jim, spoke up from the corner. He looked angry. "I bought materials. I paid my guys. I have a signed contract from him." He pointed at my father. "Then you sue him," I said simply, "because you do not have a contract with the owner. You have a contract with a trespasser. Good luck collecting." I walked over to the front door and held it open. The cold wind rushed in, swirling the dust. "Out," I said. My parents walked past me. My mother was sobbing into her hands. My father stared straight ahead. His jaw clenched so hard I thought a tooth might crack. They walked out onto the porch, past the cherry wood box they had discarded, and down the steps to their SUV. The deputy followed them to ensure they left. I watched them go. I watched the SUV back out of the driveway, the tires spinning aggressively in the gravel. I watched them drive away, back toward the highway, back to their rental house, back to the chaos they had created. I closed the door. The click of the latch was the loudest sound in the world. I was alone in the room with the inspector and the contractor. The silence returned, but this time, it wasn't heavy. It was clean. "Ms. Stevens," Inspector Henderson said gently, "I need to take photos of the damage for the report." "Go ahead," I said. I walked over to the window. I looked out at the snow. I felt a strange trembling in my hands, the adrenaline finally fading, leaving behind a deep, hollow exhaustion. But I didn't collapse. I was Maeve Stevens. I was the reliable one, and I had a lot of work to do. The silence that settled over the cabin after my parents' SUV disappeared down the lane was fragile, like a sheet of ice that had not quite frozen solid. Inspector Henderson was methodically photographing the jagged cut in the drywall, the flash of his camera illuminating the floating dust motes, gypsum and sawdust that used to be my sanctuary. "I will need to check the structural integrity of the header," Henderson said, his voice echoing in the hollowed-out room. "But it looks like they stopped just before they compromised the load-bearing stud. You got lucky, Ms. Stevens." "I don't feel lucky," I said, staring at the pile of debris on the floor. The contractor, Jim, was sullenly packing his tools into a canvas bag. He moved with the aggressive clatter of a man who knows he has lost a day's wage and is looking for someone to blame. Then, the front door burst open. It didn't open with a knock or a tentative turn of the handle. It swung wide, banging against the stopper, admitting a gust of freezing wind and the high-pitched, breathless energy of my sister. Brielle swept into the room like a parade float that had taken a wrong turn. She was wearing a white faux fur coat and holding a bottle of champagne. Kyle trailed behind her, carrying a stack of pizza boxes, looking vaguely apologetic as he wiped his boots on my vintage runner. "Surprise!" Brielle shouted, beaming at the room. "We brought lunch for the crew. How is the—" She stopped. Her eyes didn't land on me. They didn't land on the inspector or the deputy who had stepped back inside from the porch. They landed squarely on the half-demolished wall. "Is the playroom done?" she asked. The question hung in the air, absurd and devastating. She wasn't asking if the house was still standing. She wasn't asking if I was okay. She was looking at the gash in my wall and assessing it solely by the metric of her own gratification. "It looks small," she added, her face crinkling in disappointment. "I thought Dad said he was taking the whole wall out." "Brielle," Kyle hissed, nudging her. He had seen me. Brielle turned. Her smile didn't fade immediately. It curdled. She looked from me to the inspector, then to the grim-faced contractor, and finally to the orange stop-work sticker plastered on the drywall. "Maeve," she squeaked, "you are supposed to be in Tokyo." "I seem to be a disappointment to everyone today regarding my location," I said. My voice was dangerously quiet. "Put the champagne down. Brielle." She clutched the bottle to her chest. I don't understand. Dad said you were gone. He said we were celebrating the demo completion. There is no celebration, I said. And there is no playroom. There is just a crime scene and a very expensive repair bill. But, Brielle looked around, her eyes wide and panic-stricken. But we have plans. The boys are excited. I posted about it. I know, I said. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I opened the folder Tessa had compiled. Tessa saw your Instagram story this morning, I said, holding the screen up so she could see it. The one with the caption, New Year, New Home, Big Changes Coming for the Stevens Family. You tagged it Lake Life and Renovation Project. Brielle's face flushed a deep, blotchy red. It was just a caption. Maeve, it didn't mean anything. It meant you were publicly claiming my property as your own, I said. You were building a social media narrative on a foundation of theft. You weren't just visiting, Brielle. You were moving in. I wasn't, she cried, looking to Kyle for support. Tell her, Kyle, we were just going to use it for the winter. Kyle shifted his weight. Looking at the floor, he was a man who specialized in avoidance, but there was nowhere to hide in the open-concept wreck my father had created. I didn't know, Kyle muttered, addressing his boots. Your dad handled everything. He told me you signed off on it. I thought it was a gift. Stop lying, Kyle, I said. I swiped to the next image on my phone. It was a screenshot of a text thread between Kyle and my father, retrieved from the family cloud account I still had access to. Dated December 18th, I read aloud. Hey Mark, just checking on the move-in timing. If the wall is down by the 28th, can we start moving the big furniture in on New Year's Day? We need to be out of the apartment by the 5th. I looked at Kyle. You asked about move-in timing. You weren't visiting. You were relocating. Kyle went pale. He looked at Brielle, then back at me. We had to, he stammered. Our lease was up. Your lease wasn't up, I corrected him, my mind racing through the timeline. You just renewed it in October. I paid the security deposit for you. We broke it, Brielle whispered. The admission was so quiet I almost missed it. Excuse me? I asked. We broke the lease, Brielle said, her voice trembling. Tears began to spill over her lashes, tracking through her foundation. Mom and Dad said the cabin was a done deal. They said you were never there, and that you were going to sign it over to a trust eventually anyway. They told us to save the rent money. They said we could live here for free if we just helped with the remodel. I felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't just entitlement. It was financial desperation masked as a family project. My parents had convinced my sister to make herself homeless. Banking entirely on their ability to bully me into submission, they had burned her bridge for her, knowing I would be the one expected to rebuild it. So you have nowhere to live in 10 days, I stated flatly. We thought we had here, Brielle sobbed. We thought we had a home. You have a home, I said. You had an apartment that I helped you secure. You chose to gamble it on a heist. At that moment, the front door opened again. My parents walked back in. They must have been waiting at the end of the driveway, seen Brielle's car, and realized they couldn't leave her alone with me. They looked windblown and frantic. My mother rushed straight to Brielle, wrapping her arms around her. It is okay, sweetie. It is okay, Elaine cooed, glaring at me over Brielle's shoulder. Don't say another word to her. Maeve, can't you see she is upset? She should be upset, I said. She just confessed to conspiracy to commit fraud and admitted she voluntarily evicted her children based on a lie you told her. We didn't lie, my father shouted from the doorway. He pointed a shaking finger at me. We were making a plan, a contingency plan. You are so successful. Maeve, you are never here. We thought you would want to help your sister. By stealing my house? I asked. By sharing, Elaine cried. We did it because we love you. We wanted you to be part of the family again. We wanted you to see your nephews growing up in this beautiful place. We did it for love. Maeve, can't you understand that? The word hung in the air, twisted and grotesque. Love. They used it like a shield, like a magic word that was supposed to erase the felonies and the deception. I looked at my mother. I looked at the woman who had thrown my grandfather's box on the trash pile. Love doesn't forge paperwork. Mom, I said. The sentence was simple, but it sucked the oxygen out of the room. Love doesn't counterfeit signatures, I continued. Love doesn't cancel leases behind my back. Love doesn't wait until I'm out of the country to tear down my walls. That isn't love. That is predation. You are cold, my mother spat, pulling Brielle tighter. You have ice in your veins. I have boundaries, I said. And for the first time in 30 years, you are going to feel them. I turned to the contractor, who was trying to edge toward the door. Where are you going? I asked. I am leaving, Jim grunted, and I expect to be paid for the day, plus the restocking fee for the materials, $2,500. I will send you the invoice. You will send me nothing, I said. I looked at Inspector Henderson. Inspector, does this contractor have a valid permit? The permit is void due to fraudulent application, Henderson said, not looking up from his clipboard. Technically, he is performing unpermitted work on a residential structure. And, I added, looking at Jim, did you verify ownership before you took a sledgehammer to my wall? Did you ask to see the deed? Or did you just take a check from a man who doesn't own the land? Jim's face turned a mottled purple. He had a key. He said, I don't care what he said. I cut him off. You failed your due diligence. You destroyed private property without a valid contract with the owner. If you send me an invoice, I will send you a lawsuit for damages, negligence, and trespass. And I will file a complaint with the state licensing board. Jim stared at me. He looked at the inspector, who nodded in agreement. Get out, I said. Jim didn't argue. He grabbed his bag and practically ran out the door, leaving his pride and his $2,500 behind. I turned back to my family. The silence was absolute now. The pizza boxes Kyle was holding had started to smell like grease and regret. I am changing the locks today, I said. I am installing a new security system with biometric access. If any of you step foot on this property again without a written invitation, I will press charges, not just for trespass, for the fraud, for the identity theft, for everything. You wouldn't, Brielle whispered. Pulling away from our mother, she looked at me with genuine fear. Maeve, we are sisters. Then start acting like one, I said. Sisters don't steal from sisters. I walked over to the door and held it open for the second time that day. Go back to the city, I said. Call your landlord, beg for your apartment back, do whatever you have to do, but do not look at me to fix this. I am done fixing things. Maeve, my father started, his voice cracking. He looked old suddenly. The bluster was gone, replaced by a terrifying fragility. You don't know what you are doing. You don't know the whole story. I know enough, I said. No, Brielle said. She stepped forward, wiping her face. Her eyes were darting around, wild and desperate. Maeve, you don't understand. Dad had to do it. He had to get us in here. Brielle, shut up, my father hissed. It was a vicious, sharp sound. Why? I asked, looking at Brielle. Why did he have to? Because of the bank, Brielle blurted out. Because Dad. Brielle, Mark shouted, lunging forward to grab her arm. Get in the car, now. What about the bank? I asked, stepping between them. Dad, let go of her. My father looked at me. His eyes were wide, filled with a panic I had never seen before. It wasn't just the panic of getting caught. It was the panic of ruin. It is nothing, Mark panted, dragging Brielle toward the door. She is hysterical. She doesn't know what she is talking about. We are leaving. We are leaving right now. He shoved Brielle and Kyle out onto the porch. My mother followed, casting one last, hateful look at me. A look that promised this wasn't over. We will talk later, my mother said. When you are sane. Goodbye, I said. I slammed the door. I threw the deadbolt. Then I engaged the privacy latch. I leaned my forehead against the cold wood of the door. My hands were shaking, not from cold, but from the adrenaline crash. "Ms. Stevens?" I turned. Inspector Henderson was standing by the ruined wall, looking at me with a mixture of pity and respect. "I have finished the assessment," he said gently. "I can give you the name of a licensed contractor who handles emergency restorations. He is expensive, but he is honest." "Thank you," I said. "I will take it. And the deputy and I, we will file the reports. But the fraud charges, that is up to you. If you want to pursue it, you have to go to the station." "I know," I said. They left 10 minutes later. I was finally alone. I walked over to the center of the room. I looked at the gash in the wall. I looked at the yellow paint swatches. I looked at the muddy footprints on my pine floors. I walked to the window and watched the gray sky turning to dusk. The snow was falling harder now, erasing the tire tracks my family had left. I should have felt triumphant. I had won. I had protected the asset. I had held the line. But I didn't feel like a winner. I felt like a survivor of a natural disaster. And then, Brielle's words echoed in the empty room. Dad had to do it, because the bank— my father was a retired insurance adjuster. He had a pension. He had savings. He had always been the one lecturing me about fiscal responsibility. Why would the bank be involved? Why would moving Brielle into my cabin be a solution to a banking problem? I pulled out my phone. I opened my banking app. Then I hesitated. I opened a different app, a public records search engine I used for work. I typed in my parents' address, the house I grew up in, the house they owned free and clear, or so they said. The search result loaded. Lien holder, First National Bank. Status, pre-foreclosure. Notice of default, filed December 10th. I stared at the screen. My parents weren't just helping Brielle. They were broke. They were losing their own house. The plan wasn't just to move Brielle into my cabin. The plan was to move everyone into my cabin. They were going to liquidate their lives, hide the shame, and colonize my sanctuary because they had nowhere else to go. And they had financed the renovation of my house with a credit card that was likely maxed out. I sank down onto the floor, right in the middle of the dust. The knot wasn't untied. It was tighter than ever. I wasn't just fighting entitlement. I was fighting a collapse. And now that I had kicked them out, I had no idea where they were going to sleep tonight. I closed my eyes and listened to the wind howl against the glass. "Let it snow," I whispered. But I knew the storm was just beginning. The realization that my parents were facing foreclosure did not make me soften. It made me sharpen. It was the missing variable in the equation, the one piece of data that turned their erratic behavior into a desperate, calculated strategy. They were not just overstepping boundaries. They were looking for a lifeboat, and they had decided that my hull was the one they would breach to save themselves. I spent the next 48 hours in a state of cold, administrative fury. I did not return to the city immediately. I stayed in the motel in Sturgeon Bay, turning my room into a war room. Tessa Hart arrived on the morning of the 28th. She did not come with casseroles or sympathy. She came with a paralegal and 3 banker's boxes of discovery requests. "You were right about the financial distress," Tessa said, throwing a file onto the small round table between the beds. "But it is worse than a standard foreclosure. Mark and Elaine took out a private, high-interest loan 6 months ago. Predatory stuff. They used the house, their house, as collateral." I picked up the file. The numbers were staggering. $75,000, I read aloud, at 18% interest. "They are underwater," Tessa confirmed. "But here's the kicker. We found a draft document in their email outbox. They sent it to a notary friend of theirs, asking if he could backdate it." She handed me a single sheet of paper. It was titled Affidavit of Shared Residence and Temporary Occupancy. It stated, in poorly drafted legal jargon, that I, Maeve Stevens, acknowledged that Mark and Elaine Stevens had contributed significant labor and capital to the improvement of the Door County property, and in exchange were granted indefinite rights of tenancy starting January 1st, 2026. "They were going to squat," I said. The paper shook slightly in my hand. They were going to move in, claim they had done $40,000 of work, which was actually just destruction, and then dare me to evict them. Exactly, Tessa said. And in Wisconsin, once someone establishes residency and shows proof of contribution to the property value, eviction becomes a nightmare. It can take months, years, even. They were going to leverage the remodel to force a settlement. They wanted you to buy them out of a house they don't own so they could pay off their debts. It was a hostile takeover. It was corporate raiding applied to a family dynamic. File everything, I said. The restraining order, the fraud complaint, the suit for damages, burn it all down. The legal process that followed was not the dramatic courtroom showdown you see in movies. There was no screaming, no banging of gavels. It was a slow, suffocating accumulation of paperwork that crushed my parents under the weight of their own lies. The evidence was undeniable. The lock logs proved they had been entering the property for months without authorization. The security footage showed the destruction of the wall. The permit application, traced back to Brielle's IP address and phone number, proved the identity fraud. Inspector Henderson's report was the final nail. He classified the work as unlicensed, unauthorized, and structurally negligent. My parents did not fight it in court. They couldn't afford a lawyer who would touch the case. They settled. The terms were brutal, but necessary. I was granted a permanent protective order. Mark and Elaine Stevens were barred from coming within 500 feet of the Door County property or my primary residence in Chicago. They were ordered to pay restitution for the restoration of the wall and the shelves. Of course, they didn't have the money. Their own house went to auction in February. The contractor, Jim from Harborview Renovations, was a different story. When Tessa pointed out that he had performed unpermitted work based on a fraudulent contract, and that we were prepared to report him to the state licensing board, he folded immediately. He agreed to a settlement of $15,000 to cover the cleanup and the cost of hiring a real craftsman to fix his mess. He knew that losing his license would cost him a lot more than writing a check. The financial victory was hollow, but the social fallout was absolute. In the suburbs of Madison, reputation is currency. My parents had spent 30 years cultivating the image of the perfect, upper-middle-class couple. They were the ones who brought the best wine to the block party. They were the ones who bragged about their daughter's successes. That image evaporated the day the foreclosure sign went up on their lawn. Right next to the sheriff's cruiser that arrived to serve them with my restraining order, the gossip moved fast. The neighbors learned that Mark and Elaine weren't downsizing by choice. They were being evicted. They learned that the renovation project up north wasn't a family labor of love. It was a botched attempt at property theft. My mother tried to spin it. I heard from a cousin that Elaine was telling people I had suffered a mental break from overwork and had turned on them. But the digital trail Brielle had left made that story impossible to sell. Brielle's New Year, New Home posts, combined with the public record of the restraining order, painted a very clear picture. People aren't stupid. They looked at the timeline. They looked at the foreclosure. They did the math. Brielle took the hardest hit. Her marriage to Kyle, already fragile, shattered under the pressure. When Kyle realized that Brielle had actively participated in the fraud, that she had used her phone to impersonate me, he panicked. He claimed he was a victim, too. But the text messages I had saved proved he was looking up move-in dates before I even knew they were there. Kyle moved back in with his parents in March. Brielle was left alone with 2 kids, no lease, and a sister who blocked her number. She tried to reach out once, sending a long email about how family forgives. I didn't reply. I forwarded it to Tessa, who sent a cease and desist letter reminding her that digital communication violated the terms of the protective order. It was cold. It was harsh. And it was the only reason I was able to sleep at night. By April, the snow had melted in Door County. I drove up on a Friday afternoon. The air was crisp, smelling of wet earth and thawing lake water. I had hired a specialist from Green Bay to handle the restoration. He was an older man, quiet and meticulous, the kind of carpenter my grandfather would have respected. He had spent 3 weeks repairing the drywall, matching the texture perfectly. I walked into the cabin. The yellow paint was gone. The walls were back to my slate gray. The open concept gash was sealed. The kitchen once again separated from the living room, restoring the silence and the structure. But the best part was the nook. The carpenter had rebuilt the walnut shelves. They weren't exactly the same as the ones I had built. The grain was slightly different, the stain a shade darker. But they were strong. They were solid. I opened the box I had brought with me. Inside were my books, my first editions, and my grandfather's cherry wood box. I had found it on the porch that day, damp and freezing, but the tools inside were oiled and wrapped in leather. They had survived. I placed the box on the center shelf, exactly where it belonged. I walked to the front door and looked at the new lock. It was a biometric scanner with a two-factor authentication backup. There were no physical keys. There were no spare codes for emergencies. If the house caught fire, the fire department had a rapid entry box installed at the gate. My family had no access. I went into the kitchen and made a cup of tea. I stood by the window, looking out at the lake. The sun was setting, casting a long, golden path across the water. For years, I had thought that peace was something you negotiated. I thought if I gave enough, if I paid enough, if I forgave enough, I would eventually earn the right to be left alone. I thought peace was a gift that family gave you in exchange for compliance. I was wrong. Peace is not a gift. Peace is a territory. And like any territory, it has to be defended. I had lost my parents. I had lost my sister. I had lost the illusion of the Happy Stevens clan. But as I stood there, watching the light fade, I realized I didn't feel lonely. I felt light. The heavy, suffocating weight of their expectations was gone. The dread of the next phone call, the next request for money, the next boundary violation, it had all evaporated. I took a sip of tea. It was hot and strong. I walked over to the living room and sat down on my sofa. It was just me. The house was silent. The only sound was the settling of the timbers and the rhythmic lap of the water against the shore. I wasn't celebrating. There was no champagne. There was no victory lap. Revenge, I discovered, doesn't feel like a fireworks display. It doesn't feel like a surge of adrenaline. It feels like the quiet click of a heavy lock sliding into place. It feels like the return of your own life to your own hands. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to hear from you in the comments section. Tell me where you are listening from. I am always curious to know how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to the channel Jane Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story get recommended to more people who might need to hear it.